This is another antelope called a Phal Reba, and this is an extinct capron that lived there in the early Holocene that we don't have in this later time period. Anyway, if we look at the dates from this thing of the dates for herding, you can see uh, that we have dates going all the way back here. These are the Vodafone date time dates. They go back almost 1,000 BC. They're much older than any of the other dates where we have early herding, and it all looked really exciting that we might have a very early period of herding, as much as 1,000 years earlier than, or at least 800 years earlier than the accepted age for this. This is, you can see, these are dates for dung and different kinds of rock shelters, and you can see they date from about roughly probably as early as about 500 BP to about 1,000 BP, this is about 300 BP or so. Anyway, and then we have dates on koi corrals. This is a rock corral you can see the guy is pointing to, and these dates date to roughly after 1,000 BC. So we have here evidence of a pioneer phase dating from about 1,000 to 500 BC. Then we have a rock shelter phase where they're herding animals in rock shelters from about 1,000, from about 8,100 to about 1,000. And then a period when we can identify the koi as well from 1,000 to basically modern time periods. And I might say we don't have ceramics associated with this early period. We do have ceramics associated here, and it's a different kind of ceramics. It's a fiber tempered, it's a really crappy fiber tempered ceramics. And then the koi make ceramics. It's a very different thing. It's a grit tempered ceramics, very much well made. So it looks like we have three phases of occupation. The problem with this, and this is kind of a cautionary tale, is that just as we were getting ready to publish our first paper on this, there was a woman that came on the scene that did ancient DNA of domesticated animal remains. And so we gave her this early bone to look at, and her identification, I'm going to go back, of that was initially she said it was a Phal Reba, which is not outside the range of possibilities. It looks a hell of a lot more like a sheep, but we kind of thought about that and said, well, that's maybe a possible. And so we had to go back and say, well, maybe this was misidentified. So we've gone back and reanalyzed all the photographs we had of this, the Phal Reba. In the meantime, she re-identified the ancient DNA and said, no, it's either a kudu or an eland. And a kudu or an eland, those bones, I don't have a chart here, but those bones are about this, instead of this tall, they're about this big. They're off of an animal that can be as big as 2,000 pounds. And so now we're in a total conundrum, and basically it's a knockdown, drag-out fight that's going on between us and the ancient DNA people, where we just basically said, there is no way that this is the bone of an eland or a kudu. It's orders of magnitude too small, and so we're going back and we're reanalyzing all this stuff and getting into the middle of this. But this was a real lesson in, when you've got the information that you want, you think it's right, then damn, publish it and don't keep going and keep trying to figure it out. The ancient DNA, we've gone back and we've looked at it, and it's very fragmentary, and she's making kind of extreme interpretations off of very, very fragmentary data, and so we're stuck with this. But anyway, I think that we're working on this paper now. I think we're going to say that we do have a pioneer phase, a period when you had hunters and gatherers that were herding sheep, small herds of sheep in a rock and keeping them in the rock shelters. And then the koi probably develop in the Southwest Cape and then migrate into this area, because their sites, their ceramics are totally different than what you see early. And it's a period, I might add here, that in this later period, you still have hunters and gatherers on the landscape. So you have the mixture of groups there at the same time. Anyway, one of the interesting things things is there's been a lot of work with the koi. They still live and herd in the same ways, many of the same ways that they did before. And they have a lot of fat-tailed sheep and then European breeds as well. The fat-tailed sheep they keep for food, the European breeds, and you can see what this is. This is a storage building, and they raise them for wool. But the fat-tailed sheep's wool is not really effective for that. Okay, let's, I know. See where we can go here. So and this will be the last bit that we're going to talk about, what I want to talk about North America. Okay? And here, and share this. And I don't know if I can get through this. If not, then we'll finish this up and have a review next time. Okay. Hello, come on. Can everybody see that okay? So let's talk about early agriculture in Mesoamerica. And the reason we do this is because it actually, in terms of we talked about the early domestication in Africa and the spread because it's such a huge area. And North America is too, but North America, more than Africa, produce plants especially that are incredibly important to our modern agricultural systems. The earliest evidence for domestication we have in the Western Hemisphere is in Mesoamerica. It's basically in Mexico. Okay, numerous plants were domesticated there, and the most important plants were corn, beans, and squash. And those three plants were grown widely all over North America and South America, and they're important because these plants, if you eat these plants, you can pretty much survive on these plants without having nutritional deficiencies and stuff. A lot of agricultural plants, the plants provide certain kinds of things, especially carbohydrates, but they don't provide protein. But the beans provide protein, and so it's a very, as many Native American groups in the Americas know, and as a lot of people in different countries in North and South America know, you can pretty much, and most students know, you can survive on these. The other kinds of plants that are domesticated are chili peppers, which may be the oldest domesticated plant, avocado, which is, that's perfect, gourds, which were not eaten, but were used for storage, cotton, obviously for weaving, and cacao, i.e. chocolate. And one of the funny things, we excavated the last mission established in Texas, down on the coast of a town called Refugio, and it was established for the Caracua Indians in 1798. And one of the things we did is we looked at all the historic records we could find of this, and we looked at the kinds of things that the missionaries, the Catholic missionaries, were importing from Mexico to this mission, very isolated place. And the most common item that they imported was iconography, paintings, statues, this kind of thing. The second most common thing that they brought in was chocolate. Okay, these guys love chocolate. They were raising plenty of cattle. They had crops. They had food. So one thing they did have, but boy, what they wanted was chocolate. And these guys were chocoholics in a big way, which surprised me, to be honest with you. I didn't expect that. Okay. So the hunt for corn focuses on the research of a Canadian archaeologist by the name of Richard McNeish. And in the late 40s, this was just after World War II, he began a systematic search for the origin of corn. And what he started at is looking at the modern distribution of corn, what areas have the most variety of corn that's being raised. And what he saw is the greatest variety of corn, most different kind of subspecies of corn, were being grown in Mexico. And so McNeish said that's where corn had to have been domesticated. The idea, the longer it had been domesticated, the more varieties developed. And although they were being taken out of the core area would have the greatest variety of corn. And if we look at the modern varieties of corn, there are a lot of them. There, dent corns, and there's popcorns. There's these gigantic corns. This is modern U.S. belt dent corn. There are ladyfinger popcorns. There's a huge different variety of colors and all sorts of things. And corn is one of these things. This is the little smallest and probably the most ancient modern kind of corn being grown. But there are a lot of different breeds that are developed. And so McNeish, in terms of the archaeology, knew he had to find preserved corn. And of course, it's easily decomposed. There's no question about that. So he had to look in areas where there was limestone, because limestone erodes into rock shelters and caves. And it's in these protected areas where you would have corn discarded that would be still preserved. And so he said, okay, I have to look at Mexico, and I have to look in areas where there's limestone. So he got a geological map out, and he said, here are the areas where there's limestone. Okay? Okay, I'll just mention this. Okay? And you look for areas where you're going to have, if you just have open areas, you're not going to find preserved corn in most cases. So the first place he looked was in this area, and it's in Tamaulipas here, and La Pera Cave and Ocampo Cave, which is also known as Romero's Cave, and you have big limestone deposits here. The other advantage this had is he was coming in from the north, and so this was closer. It was easier to get to. Okay. Also, let me just point out here that there are other sites here down in the Tehuacan Valley and Oaxaca, and we'll talk about those. And we'll also talk about a site up here called Cerro Juanaquino, and then Bat Cave, which is in New Mexico. Okay. So you first look at Tamaulipas. It's only 150 kilometers south of the U.S. border, easy to get to. And at La Pera and Romero's Cave, he found abundant corn remains. There was a lot. I have a colleague that works in Austin that went back and re-excavated these for his dissertation just a few years ago, and there is a lot of corn. But there's a lot of evidence for continued wild plant exploitation. They see evidence of pinyon pine seeds being used and hackberry seeds. They're still going after wild animals, antelope, deer, rabbits. So it's a continuation of hunting and gathering with some corn domestication. But it's not as old as he wanted it to be. And I might add that in these early phases, there are no domesticated animals, and the only domesticated animal came out of Mexico was the turkey, right? Okay.
Stop.
So the work in Tamaulipas convinced McNeish, because it wasn't very old, you had more complex sites further south. It convinced him that you had to go further south for these. And the next area he looked in was in the Tehuacan Valley. This is just outside of Pueblo, New Mexico. And he worked there he worked in Tamaulipas in the 1950s. In the 1960s, he began to work in the Tehuacan Valley. And in doing this, McNeish did the same thing that Braidwood did when he was looking for early agriculture in the Middle East. And that is, he got a whole team of specialists to work with him. So he had botanists and geologists and zoologists. But he did something a little bit different than what Braidwood did, is that he trained a number of graduate students in archaeology in these other fields. So he got people to train both in archaeology and in botany, or in zoology and archaeology. And in fact, one of the people that we'll talk about and have talked about is Kent Flannery. He worked with McNeish, and he was one of these people that was co-trained in two different fields. And so in this, he enlisted some very important specialists. He got a guy from Harvard, Paul Mangelsdorf, and William Galenta from Harvard to analyze the maize. He got Hugh Cutler from the Missouri Botanical Garden, and Whitaker from the U.S. Department of Agriculture did the squashes, and Lawrence Kaplan, University of Boston, analyzed the beans. And so he really had what were considered in their respective fields of botany to be some of the really the true specialists in these fields that knew these plants and animals in a big way. So he